So when I was thinking about what to talk about today, I wasn't really sure. You never know from week to week what we're going to need to be talking about in this world. And I looked at the music that Amanda had chosen for this week, and I thought, oh, I really like that phrase, I still have joy. And I think that for those of you that have been coming for a while since the beginning of the year, I have been saying since January, 2025 was hard, but 2026 is going to be really great and light, and I feel it. And then one of my friends, a congregant here this week, said, so we're halfway through 2026, how's it going? I was like, well, you know, it has not been quite as light and optimistic as I thought it could be, as I think it should be. But I do think it's always important, even when we're acknowledging things that aren't going right, even when we're acknowledging things that are difficult, we still have to have joy. We still have to have a sense of optimism. We have to hold on to a sense of hope. And I don't think it's an either or, right? I don't think we're either acknowledging the pain and the suffering in the world, or we're being optimistic and hopeful and joyful. I think if we're truly authentic, we can hold both. We can be both at the same time. And so, you know, June every year is Pride Month, and so it's so wonderful that we can enter into June with this beautiful music about pride. We can enter into June with this music about being joyful. And, you know, we have, you know, in terms of just the history of this country, Juneteenth is in June, where we, you know, look at the history and the racism that has been in this country. And so what I have been doing, and when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, once again, because I think it's just this, for those of us who are in this world, paying attention to this world, who have a conscience about what's going on, there is an ongoing tension between finding that balance of being grounded and centered, staying rooted in love and compassion, combined with the righteous indignation in our world right now that requires action. And so that is the dichotomy that I've been struggling with, is how do we stay joyful? How do we stay grounded, rooted, centered in love, while paying attention to the pain and the cruelty and the destruction around us? And this week, I don't know how much it's made the news. I hope maybe it's made the news more than I've seen. There is something big happening at a place called Delaney Hall in New Jersey. Is everybody aware of what's going on? It's a detention center, because it's not making the news. There's a detention center named Delaney Hall in New Jersey. The people, the immigrants that are being detained there, are on a hunger strike. And people, there are a lot of protests, but one of the things that I heard yesterday, there were 4 ambulances that went in and out of Delaney Hall just yesterday, and the word that is coming out is that the people are being beat up inside of there. And that's coming from my colleagues, my minister, UU minister colleagues, who are there and reporting to those of us on the minister chat. But what I did was this morning, I just, went online to see what the main media is, and it was CBS or ABC or one of them. They were talking about it, but here's what's interesting, and this is the type of thing we have to pay attention to. What the article talked about, they talked about the protesters. They talked about how many protesters. They talked about what the protesters were doing. They talked about the clash between the protesters. They talked about the protesters that are getting arrested. Do you want to know what's missing in all of that, the whole article that I read? There was not one thing about what is happening inside of that building. They reported on it in a very safe, neutral way. They made the story the people outside the building, and they completely ignored the fact that there is major abuse happening. They're talking about there's worms in the food. They are being served frozen food that's still frozen. People are dying inside of that detention center, and the news that we're getting from the mainstream media is that there are protests. And somebody, I don't know, I saw something about somebody bit an ICE officer or something like that. So that's what we're hearing. And usually, in the past, when something is going on, I will say, has everybody heard about this? And usually, at least in this little UU congregation, everybody is nodding their head. Today, that didn't happen. People are not hearing about it. And what I am going to stand up here and say, that is a concentration camp. When you are detained, you don't know how long you're going to be detained. Your family and your loved ones don't know where you are. And then people are coming out in ambulances because they are dying either of hunger or starvation or because they've been beaten. That is a concentration camp. And that is in the United States of America in the year 2026. And most of us don't know about it. And we, for the most part, Unitarian Universalists, are paying attention. We are trying to stay informed. We are trying to stay up to date. We're doing our best. And thank goodness that there are people showing up at Delaney Hall. Thank goodness there are protests. Thank goodness there are witnesses. Thank goodness there are independent media sources that are not part of this mainline conglomeration that's just getting sucked up. Thank goodness there are individual people who still collectively have a conscience about who we are as human beings, about who we are as Americans, about who we are, the people who live in New Jersey, the people who live in Minnesota, right? Like, I can stand up here and I can talk about what I've heard about what's happening in New Jersey, but I'm here in Western Colorado. So our job, I think, when I ask that question is, where do we find that balance, right? I didn't have a lot of influence over what was happening in Minnesota. I don't have a lot of influence over what is happening in New Jersey right now. I do have a pretty good amount of influence, as do all of us, to be informed and aware and know what's happening in Grand Junction, Colorado. Because if it can happen in New Jersey and it can happen in Minnesota and it's happening, they had alligator Alcatraz in Florida, it's happening everywhere. And the reason I think that it's horrendous. What is happening is horrendous. I think it could have been much, much worse at this point in the game if so many individual people, like those of us in this room, like those people in Minnesota, those people in New Jersey right now, if we just sat down, gave up, lost hope, decided to just kind of go our own way because it's not impacting us, it could have been so much worse. And it's not. Because what we do matters. What we say matters. How we show up matters. And I really, really wanted by June of 2026 to be like, it is a great year. But we're not there yet. And so my invitation for us, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody who is here, who is engaged, who is showing up, who is speaking out, whether it's from a pulpit like I get to do, whether it's at a family dinner like all of you get to do, whether it's at a neighborhood barbecue celebrating the 250th year of this country, whether it's at a UFC cage fight on the White House grounds. Who does that? But first of all, I want to say thank you. Because even when it feels like our little voice, I'm just one voice, each of us is just one voice. But collectively, it is a strong voice. Collectively, it is a powerful voice. Collectively, it becomes a singing resistance choir. And that matters. And I think this little town of Grand Junction, who voted for Donald Trump at like 68, 69%, I think it's changing. And I think it's changing because of many of the voices right here in this room. Because of the individual work that so many of us in this room are doing based on the passion that we have, whether it's the Palestinian children in Gaza, whether it's the LGBTQ and all of the work that the Three Sisters Company is doing to raise and elevate the voices of the LGBT community and the voices of women, whether it's the resistance choir. It's making a difference. And we're just a little community. But we are a strong community. We are a powerful community. And we have each other. And I mean, look around you right now. This is a strong group of people. And we are not doing this alone. And so I say thank you for that. When I was thinking about what I wanted to say this morning, I know that I go back to quoting Howard Thurman a lot, but it's because he is a person who I feel like was needed. His voice was so needed 100 years ago, and his voice is so needed today. And he has this sermon in which he says, "How can I be happy in heaven if my brother is in hell?" And then he goes on to acknowledge that tension that happens between being a contemplative and using our minds, using our words, using our power, our hearts in a powerfully, spiritually grounded, peaceful way, with that tension to acknowledge the indignation and the pain and the suffering that is being perpetrated on so many different groups of people in this country and throughout the world. And so I go back to his words. And for those of you who haven't heard me talk about Howard Thurman, Dr. Howard Thurman was born in 1899. He was raised by his grandmother, who was born as a slave. And he has a beautiful, he created one of the first interracial faith communities in San Francisco in like the 30s and 40s. Even before the civil rights movement, he was doing this powerful work. And he was a generation ahead of Martin Luther King and the civil rights workers, but he was involved with them. And I've shared that he and his wife, they didn't go out and they weren't the ones marching and speaking and being public, but they were the ones opening their homes and their doors to Martin Luther King and his friends when they were young, and helping them get grounded and centered to understand what they were doing, why they were fighting for it, and how they were going to be grounded and centered within the righteous indignation. He was the grounding rod for the people that were doing the action. And so what I thought I'd like to do today is actually, instead of quoting him, I want you to hear him. Because when you have a powerful speaker, there's something called spiritual tone, and it's a vibration. And anybody that is a beautiful singer, knows about that vibration that comes with that powerful voice. And so I can quote his words, but I want you to hear the spiritual tone of a true master and a true mystic. And the power, the vibrational power behind the words. Because what we say, the words that we choose, they matter, they're important, but the way we express them is pretty powerful. So I'm gonna play about 3 minutes of him, and it's gonna start with him talking about how can we be in heaven when our neighbor is in hell. And then he goes on to talk just a little bit about that tension between being in the world and retreating and getting grounded and centered. And so what we'll do is we'll listen to it, and I know if the sound isn't great for those that might have hearing aids or whatever, I will then reread some of his words, but I want you to hear him in his own words first.
Danger. That one of the major sources of
Maybe Cynthia, do you need to mute?
pride in the human spirit. is the delusion that it can withdraw and enjoy God forever and ever and ever. But how can I be happy in heaven if my brother is in hell? How can I? Can't do it. Now the other source, you see, of pride and arrogance is just the reverse. That I have no time for the luxury of withdrawal, of the little retreat, of taking time out. Things must be done. Action, 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 action. One of the reasons why, these people say, one of the reasons why the world is as it is now, there's so many people whose heads are in the clouds. What we need is practical people. We are suffering from that right now. We say that one of the reasons why our whole government is disintegrated, and I'm not preaching a sermon on politics, but one of the reasons why we say our government is disintegrated so and so, we have no businessmen running things. Businessmen, they're the practical people, they know how to do. And that becomes a source of pride and arrogance, because I begin to develop contempt for the retreater, for the person who withdraws, for the thinker. He's visionary. He doesn't know anything about the facts of life. Now what I'm saying is, and I'm through now, practically, that it is not one or the other of these, but if we want to be whole human beings, we've got to breathe in and out, in and out, in and out. For when I withdraw, even for 15 minutes a day, I not only have a chance to restore the waste places of my own spirit, to recapture the lost radiance of my own commitment, see my own goals clarified, bring my own life more into focus. Whether I'm a religious man or not, even in terms of straight humanistic considerations, it's valid. I think it's more than that, but even on that level, it's valid. But not only does that happen to me, but when I withdraw and center down in my own spirit. Now this is what I believe, my friends. I believe that in that act, I become involved in the very ground of vitality in which it is possible for me to make contact with other human beings at a level that transcends all of the spoken, that I can never understand through the formal discursive processes of mind. And I think it is at that level that a great awareness, not only of the meaning of life in general, but the meaning and the dignity of human life. And then when I come out of that and go to work in my functioning, I am building my house, my world, by a blueprint that is eternal.
With that, let us sing Turn the World Around, 1074.